The 25th day of June in the year 1983 dawned beautifully in the Helena National Forest, where the summer sun rose over the rugged tree-lined ridges of the Elkhorn Mountains. This area, located not far from Helena, Montana, was the kind of place where families came to breathe, to stretch out from the stresses of everyday life, and to feel the world slow down. Here the air carried the earthy scent of pine and sun-warmed soil, and the sounds of the forest, birds calling, water trickling, branches sighing, formed the kind of natural symphony that made you forget everything but the moment you were in. That Saturday was special. Members of the Capital City Radio Club, a small but close-knit community of amateur radio operators, had organized a friendly picnic just off Warm Springs Creek Road. These gatherings were common for the group. They loved being outdoors, connecting their radios, cooking together, and watching their kids run free under the vast Montana sky. Families arrived in cars loaded with coolers, folding chairs, blankets, and excited children eager to explore the creek. Among the families who attended that day were Nancy and Kim Marshall and their children. Nancy's daughter, Nyleen Kay Marshall, had just turned 4 the previous fall. Born on the 18th of September, 1978, she was the kind of child adults naturally adored. Quiet but bright, gentle but curious, and deeply attached to her mother, stepfather, and siblings. With her soft brown hair, big blue eyes, and the dimples that appeared whenever she smiled, she looked like a child painted in watercolor, delicate and full of life. Her stepfather, Kim, who had adopted her after marrying Nancy, described her as an angelic child, one of the sweetest little girls you could meet. Everyone close to her felt the same. Nyleen had a gentle presence, the kind of child who lingered by flowers to watch butterflies or knelt in the grass to inspect tiny stones. She was not a child who ran wildly or wandered far. She preferred being near her family, near her siblings, and near the people she trusted. That morning, as the Marshalls arrived and the picnic setup began, little Nyleen could hardly contain her excitement. The warm sun reflected off the flowing creek, making the water sparkle like glass shards scattered across the surface. The children were given permission to play by the creek as long as they stayed within earshot. It was a classic Montana scene of the early 80s. Parents chatting, setting out sandwiches and salads, while their children's laughter carried through the trees. The children darted off toward the creek bank, barefoot, carefree, and full of the kind of untamed joy that made adults smile. Among them was Nyleen, in her little yellow shirt and shorts, her feet bare against the warm earth. This was the kind of day where the world felt gentle, kind, and safe. It was the kind of day where danger felt impossible. And yet, within a few short hours, it would become the site of one of Montana's most haunting mysteries, a disappearance that would stun a community, devastate a family, and leave investigators grasping for answers they would never find. The children spread out along the creek's edge, some splashing in the shallow water, others trying to catch frogs near the beaver dam. A few wandered off to explore a weathered, partially collapsed cabin tucked a short distance into the trees, an old structure locals sometimes mentioned, but rarely visited. It was a point of curiosity for the older children, who were drawn by the thrill of exploration, though every adult later confirmed it was safe, well within the bounds of where the children were allowed to go. Nyleen played with 2 older children near the rocks, giggling as a frog slipped from her hands. She was by no means alone. She had company, she had playmates, and she had the familiar sounds of nearby adults. Nothing about her demeanor indicated fear or restlessness. No adult watching the children noticed anything unusual at all. Eventually, one of the older kids called that it was time to head back. Lunch was nearly ready, and the adults expected everyone to regroup. The children who had explored the cabin started back toward the picnic area. The 2 older kids near the creek, who had been playing with Nyleen, began climbing the path as well. Nyleen was behind them, walking, not running, still near the rocks. One child later said she had turned back to check on her. Nyleen was there, and then in the space of a few heartbeats, she wasn't. The older children assumed she was stopping to pick up something or simply moving at her own pace. They continued up the path, expecting her to appear behind them at any moment, but she didn't. This was the last confirmed moment anyone saw 4-year-old Nyleen Kay Marshall. No scream, no sound of a fall, no snap of a branch, no cry for help. Just nothing. By the time the children reached the picnic area and adults asked where Nyleen was, a ripple of confusion turned into a wave of concern. Nancy called her name several times. No answer. Kim jogged down the path, expecting to find her distracted by a rock or a frog, but she was nowhere. The family moved from concern to worried to terrified in the span of minutes. Parents know their children's patterns, how far they wander, what they fear, what they avoid. Nancy and Kim knew that Nyleen hated walking barefoot on rough ground. She complained about sharp rocks, thistles, and pebbles. She would not voluntarily go far from the creek without shoes. This was not a child who wandered deep into the woods without calling for her mother. Something felt wrong immediately. Nancy and Kim began calling louder, voices carrying along the creek. Other adults joined in. The initial search took minutes. Quick sweeps, looking behind trees, peering into bushes. When she didn't answer, fear tightened its grip. The picnic, which minutes earlier had been filled with the sounds of laughter, fell silent except for the frantic calls of worried parents. Within 20 minutes, the entire group realized the unthinkable might be happening. A child was missing, and not just out of view, gone. At first, the search was instinctual. Run to the water, check the brush, look for footprints in the mud. Ask every child one by one, "Did you see her? Where was she standing?" But nothing pointed to her location. They checked the abandoned cabin, empty. They checked up the bank, no footprints. They checked the shallow creek, no dragging marks, no splash heard. One adult sprinted up to the road to shout her name. Others combed the trees. Still nothing. Soon, the quiet fear of the parents turned into a full-blown emergency. Someone got in their car and drove to find a phone. Remember, this was 1983. No cell phones, no radios except the ham equipment, which wasn't operating at that moment. They reached law enforcement, and within a short time, deputies from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office arrived. When they stepped out of their vehicles, they entered one of the most difficult environments imaginable for a missing child scenario. A forest filled with steep cliffs, dense vegetation, thick underbrush, deep shadows, and miles of rugged terrain. A creek running along natural hiding spots. Old abandoned mine shafts, some flooded, some not marked by signage. Remnants of Montana's mining history. Wildlife. Sudden elevation changes. Dozens of places a small child could vanish in an instant. Even seasoned officers felt a chill. If Nyleen had simply wandered off, she could not have gotten far. And if she hadn't wandered off, the implication was unthinkable. The Elkhorn Mountains are beautiful, but they can be cruel. Their landscape, shaped by volcanic uplift and historic mining booms, is riddled with hazards hidden beneath picturesque scenery. Off-trail, the forest floor becomes uneven, unpredictable. A child barefoot and frightened could twist an ankle, slip down a slope, or become tangled in brush. Rusted mining equipment lies half buried in weeds. Open shafts, some barely wider than a man's shoulders, drop straight down into darkness for dozens of feet. Some are filled with icy water. Some are dry and jagged. Many are nearly invisible until you're standing on top of them. Even experienced hikers treated the area with caution. For a 4-year-old, the danger level multiplied dramatically. This is why the sheriff's office wasted no time. They knew the likelihood of finding a missing child decreased rapidly after the first hour, and even more sharply after the first night. The terrain could hide evidence, distort sound, and swallow footprints before searchers spotted them. Time was everything. As daylight faded, deputies organized the first official search teams. Volunteers were instructed to walk shoulder to shoulder, scanning the ground inch by inch. Flashlights cut through darkness. The creek glinted under beams of light as searchers checked the water repeatedly. Nancy remained at the center of the search, calling her daughter's name until her voice cracked and her throat burned. Kim tried to stay composed, needing to be strong for his devastated wife, but the look on his face betrayed a rising dread. Children do not simply vanish from sight without some trace. But the forest gave nothing back. No footprints, no clothing, no disturbed bushes, no sound, no trail. The night grew colder. No one slept. Every parent there imagined what it would be like to be alone in the woods at 4 years old, with no shoes, no jacket, and no idea how to find your way home. By dawn, law enforcement had already decided that this would become one of the largest search operations the region had ever seen, but nothing could prepare them for the magnitude of what was to come. Morning on the 26th of June ushered in a historic mobilization. Police, search and rescue volunteers, local ranchers, hikers, hunters, Boy Scouts, and entire church groups streamed into the area. News spread rapidly across Montana. A 4-year-old girl was missing in the mountains. Something about that sentence compelled people to drop everything. In total, nearly 3,000 individual search assignments were completed over the next 10 days, carried out by roughly 2,800 volunteers, many of them total strangers who simply could not bear the thought of a lost child in their wilderness. The Marshalls attended the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and word traveled fast through the local wards. Volunteers from throughout the region drove up into the Elkhorns to help. They brought horses, radios, food, and manpower. It became the largest coordinated search Jefferson County had ever mounted. Everyone believed they would find her. Everyone believed a child couldn't just disappear. Everyone was wrong. Search and rescue teams implemented strict, methodical strategies. They knew the terrain's dangers intimately and approached the operation with precision. Grid Search's volunteers were instructed to spread out at arm's length, forming long, human chains. They moved forward slowly, eyes scanning every inch for footprints, torn fabric, or small disturbances in vegetation. If anyone spotted something, they would freeze the line and investigate. One volunteer, Ken Gardner, recalled this with emotion years later. He said, "Stretch your hands out." So my arm out to your arm, out to his arm. Huge areas of grid searches. He also confessed, "I can kind of feel it right now. I've got kids of my own." His voice cracked when he said it. These volunteers weren't just searching for a stranger's daughter. They were searching for a child they had come to care for. Because when you look for a missing child, you naturally imagine your own child in their place. It's a visceral fear, a fear that fuels determination. Infrared helicopters. Helicopters equipped with heat-sensing devices flew over the forest canopy, scanning for a heat signature. In the early 1980s, this technology was new and imperfect, but it offered hope. If a warm human body was somewhere under the trees, they would detect it. They found nothing. Dogs tracking dogs were brought in, including a highly trained search dog named Juke, credited with finding 37 people in previous missions. Juke picked up a scent, briefly, then he lost it. Handlers were puzzled. A scent should not simply evaporate unless the child was carried, the scent trail ended abruptly, or environmental factors scattered it. It was an ominous sign. Mine shaft inspections teams inspected every open mine shaft they could locate. Some they entered, some they lowered cameras into, some they probed with poles. None revealed any trace of a child. The drained pond. They drained a pond near the creek, fearing she may have slipped into deep water. The pond emptied. Nothing. Every search effort led back to one haunting truth. There was no trace of Nyleen anywhere. As the days passed, the weather turned against them. Rain soaked the ground, washing away any footprints that might have existed. Temperatures dropped. On the 5th day, something else arrived. Snow. Unseasonable, almost mocking, it settled across the mountaintops, even frosting the search area at lower elevations. Search and rescue leader Ralph DeCunzo voiced what many were thinking. By day 5, with the elements and the potential of dangerous critters, it came into our minds that we may not have a successful end to this. Those words, spoken years later, still carried the pain of that moment. Searchers were cold, exhausted, emotionally drained, but they kept going because the alternative, stopping, was unbearable. Every person out there was driven by a singular image, a barefoot little girl alone in the snow. They pushed through wind, rain, and mud. They scraped their knees. They tore their hands on branches. They cried without shame. But on the 4th of July, 10 days after Nyleen disappeared, search leadership faced a terrible decision. They had to suspend the official search. The mountains were not giving her back. When the announcement came that the search was being called off, the crowd of volunteers fell silent. Some cried openly. Some stood with their heads bowed. Some hugged Nancy and Kim, apologizing even though they had nothing to apologize for. No one wanted to leave that mountain without her, but they had done everything humanly possible. For Nancy, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Her arms felt empty. Her heart felt shattered. She could not imagine returning home without her daughter. She couldn't imagine Nyleen being anywhere but in her embrace. Kim, trying to steady himself, told Nancy they would not stop searching. Not really, not ever. And they didn't. Even after the official search ended, people kept looking. Hunters scanned the trees for yellow clothing. Hikers stopped along trails, listening for strange echoes. But the next clue would not come from the mountains. It would come from the mouths of children, and it would change the direction of the investigation forever. In the immediate aftermath of the search, while adults carried the heaviest weight of fear and grief, something subtle began emerging from the children who had been at the picnic. As the shock wore off, bits of memory, small, seemingly insignificant details, started surfacing. Children sometimes hesitate after a traumatic event, not because they intend to hide the truth, but because they often struggle to understand what they saw or whether it matters. But in the days following Nyleen's disappearance, several children shared the same unsettling detail, independently of one another. It began with two girls who had last seen Nyleen earlier in the afternoon. As one adult gently asked them where they had last seen Nyleen, one of the girls hesitated, then admitted, "There was a man near her." The adults paused. "A man?" She nodded. "He was," she said, wearing a purple jogging suit, and he had stepped out from behind the trees where Nyleen was sitting near the rocks. Another child, separately, reported something similar. She said that as she and another child walked by the creek, they noticed the man emerging from behind the trees. She described him as strange and thought he didn't belong there. He didn't look like a father from the picnic group. He wasn't someone she had seen earlier. The two girls said they heard Nyleen speaking to him. One of them recalled her saying, "My brother can run faster than you." It sounded playful, innocent, the kind of thing a child might say to an adult making friendly conversation. But then came a chilling detail. A 6-year-old boy told police that earlier in the day, Nyleen had said something odd to him. "That man wants me to follow the shadow." The shadow. The words echoed through investigators' minds. Children don't fabricate phrases like that. They repeat what they hear. It was deeply unsettling. Then came a detail that investigators found even more disturbing. The children who reported these things had not talked to each other. Their parents had taken them home early because of the chaos and fear. They had been interviewed separately without hearing the other children's statements. This meant their stories were not contaminated. They were describing events that happened. A strange man, a purple jogging suit, conversations with Nyleen, the invitation to follow the shadow. And then, both the man and the child vanished. Investigators now faced an entirely new possibility. Nyleen had not wandered into the forest. She had been abducted. The moment these accounts surfaced, the case pivoted sharply. No longer solely a missing child investigation, it became a potential child abduction case. Detectives immediately brought in a sketch artist. The two girls described the man as best they could. Even small children can recall certain types of details vividly. Hair, clothing color, the shape of a face, or the way a person stood. They described the purple jogging suit, his stance, the approximate age, and the general features of his face. The resulting composure sketch showed a Caucasian man in his 20s or 30s, medium build, dark hair, distinctive, almost athletic clothing for the woods. The sketch was circulated across Montana and eventually throughout the United States. Law enforcement agencies in several states compared the image to suspects on their radar. Shockingly, the sketch resembled several individuals already wanted for child abduction or related crimes. One was suspected in the kidnapping and murder of another child, but when investigators tracked these people down, none could be placed in Montana at the right time. Lead after lead dried up. Then the FBI escalated their involvement. They treated the area not just as a missing child location, but as a crime scene. Detectives interviewed every adult at the picnic. They checked vehicles, searched belongings, and scrutinized movements that day. They mapped who was where, who spoke to whom, and who left when. No one recognized the man in the purple jogging suit. No one claimed to have seen him earlier in the day. It was as if he appeared only in that moment, a ghost materializing out of the forest shadows. And then, just as quickly, he vanished again. If a stranger had taken Nyleen, investigators had to understand how such a crime could unfold so quickly. How does someone abduct a 4-year-old child with dozens of families nearby without a scream or a witness? For detectives, several unnerving possibilities took shape. Possibility 1. He had been watching all day. A predator often watches his environment, waiting for a moment of isolation, a child briefly separated from her group, an adult looking away, a laugh masking a cry. The two older children walked up the path. In that brief window, Nyleen was alone. That might have been his moment. Possibility 2. He gained her trust instantly. Some abductors have an uncanny ability to appear friendly, safe, non-threatening. A smile, a gentle tone, a playful comment. It takes little to disarm a child who feels secure in her surroundings. If he spoke softly, if he crouched down to her level, if he said he was with the picnic or knew her parents, she may not have felt frightened. Possibility 3. He physically lifted her and carried her into the woods. Children can be silenced by fear, a hand over a mouth, a whisper that says, "Don't scream," a firm grip under the arms. The creek may have masked sound, the trees may have absorbed footsteps. The moment may have been so brief that no one nearby noticed movement. Possibility 4. He had help or a vehicle hidden nearby. If a second person was waiting deeper in the woods, or if he had a concealed car or motorcycle along one of the side paths, he could have taken her quickly out of the area. No one at the picnic saw a strange vehicle, but the forest pathways allowed access from multiple points. Investigators considered all of these scenarios. None could be ruled out. As is standard procedure in every missing child investigation, the Marshall family themselves came under scrutiny early on. Law enforcement cannot assume innocence, not because they suspect wrongdoing, but because statistically many missing child cases are linked to family members. Detectives must verify every detail, every timestamp, every movement. Nancy and Kim understood the need for thoroughness, but nothing prepared them for the emotional toll of the interrogation process. One FBI agent, using a confrontational tactic intended to break suspects, turned his focus on Kim and accused him directly. "You killed your daughter." Kim was blindsided. Nancy broke down. She screamed, cried, and lashed out, because the statement wasn't just false, it was cruel. Another agent reportedly told her, "She's dead. Get over it." It is difficult to imagine the pain such words inflicted. Nancy, a grieving mother already in anguish, now found herself accused of something unthinkable. Her response was immediate. "I will never get over it. My daughter is alive." Mentally and emotionally, it marked a turning point. Nancy's grief hardened into something else. Determination. She would not let the investigation falter. She would not let Nyleen be forgotten. She would not stop until answers were found. In this era, the early to mid-80s, law enforcement interrogation tactics were often harsh, direct, and confrontational. Psychological pressure was seen as a useful tool, but for innocent families it could deepen trauma. The Marshalls passed every test. Their alibis were verified. Their accounts never changed. Their love for Nyleen was unmistakable. Investigators eventually shifted focus back to outside suspects, but Nancy never forgot how she was treated, and she never forgave it. During the early stages of the investigation, the Marshalls provided law enforcement with numerous family photographs of Nyleen, baby pictures, school pictures, snapshots of birthdays, family outings, holidays, and candid moments showing her smile and expressions. These photos were essential for search posters and missing child databases. But then came another heartbreaking blow. The photographs were sent to a lab for copying and forensic process. A fire broke out in the facility, burning through equipment, burning through chemicals, and burning through irreplaceable memories. All of Nyleen's photographs submitted for processing were destroyed, every last one. Kim and Nancy had backups at home, but many originals, unique pictures that were only printed once, were gone forever. It felt symbolic, as if the universe was stripping away every piece of her little girl. Nancy sank deeper into grief, but also fiercer into purpose. She began her own campaign, a one-woman mission to keep Nyleen's image alive across America. If you traveled across Montana, then Idaho, Wyoming, Utah, or Colorado in the mid to late 1980s, chances are you saw Nyleen's face at gas stations, supermarkets, bus stops, and post offices. Nancy had missing posters printed by the thousands. She mailed them to every police department in North America, every child safety center, every hospital, every rest area along major highway corridors. Some were posted in Canada, some reached Puerto Rico, some were found in airports. This was long before viral social media campaigns or nationwide Amber Alerts existed. Her work was manual, time-consuming, and costly, but Nancy was unstoppable. She wanted the world to know her daughter. She wanted the world to see her face. She wanted the world to look for her. And it worked. Tips began pouring in. A girl matching Nyleen's description seen with a man in Wisconsin, California, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Washington State, Texas, British Columbia. Reports came from malls, restaurants, roadside motels, and rest stops. But none of the sightings were ever confirmed. Still, Nancy clung to hope, because hope at this stage was all she had left. For 2 long, agonizing years, the investigation trudged forward without progress. Then on the 27th of November, 1985, a call came in to the newly established National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC. The caller refused to give his name. His voice was calm, deliberate, almost rehearsed. He said, "I have the girl you're looking for. I have Nyleen." The operator froze. The caller continued, saying the child was safe, cared for, and living with him. He did not ask for ransom. He did not say where he was. He did not provide an explanation for taking her. He simply said, "I love her. I take care of her." Then the line went dead. NCMX staff immediately alerted the FBI. The number was traced, not to a home, not to a business, but to a payphone in Madison, Wisconsin. This was important. 2 earlier unconfirmed sightings of a child resembling Nyleen had been reported in Wisconsin, and now suddenly an anonymous man was calling from there. The FBI began monitoring payphones in the area, but the next breakthrough wouldn't come through the phone. It would arrive in an envelope. 2 months after the phone call, Child Find of America received a typewritten letter. It was anonymous, it was chillingly detailed, and it was postmarked from Madison, Wisconsin. The letter began with a claim, "I am the man who took Nyleen." Then he went further, a full confession of sorts, but twisted, delusional, and horrifying. He said, "She is a sweet little girl, and because I have grown to love her, I realize how much her family must miss her." He described picking her up on the road between Helena and Boulder, holding her because she was crying and frightened, and deciding to keep her. Then he wrote, "I just can't let her go." The letter detailed her daily life, her bathing routine, her eating habits, her travel history, and even the growth of her adult teeth. He claims she accompanied him on trips to San Francisco, New York, Oklahoma City, New Orleans, Nashville, Chicago, Puerto Rico, Canada, and even Britain for a month. He said he had a trust fund or investment income that allowed him to work from home, care for her, and homeschool her. He wrote, "She laughs when we clown around. She hugs me sometimes for no reason." To an untrained eye, it sounded obsessive. To a professional, it sounded like grooming rationalization. The language of a predator convincing himself he was doing something loving instead of monstrous. The letter contained details never released publicly, such as her middle name, her mannerisms, and the condition of her baby teeth. The FBI concluded this was no prank. The writer knew things only someone close to Nyleen could know. The letter also suggested emotional trauma within the writer himself. mentioning the death of his family in a car crash during his youth. But then the letter took a darker turn. Disguised in gentle, falsely loving language was a horrifying admission. A form of sexual abuse the writer claimed was not harmful. The FBI knew immediately. This was a dangerous individual. This was a predator. This was someone who had taken a child and had no intention of ever giving her back. The FBI began tracing the letters. Every envelope, every typeface, every postal route, all signs pointed to the Madison, Wisconsin area. They monitored payphones. They studied caller patterns. They checked surveillance records when possible. They canvassed neighborhoods. During the mid-'80s, public payphones were common. They were in grocery stores, malls, gas stations, libraries, laundromats, and street corners. If the caller was using different payphones to avoid detection, it meant he was local, familiar with the area, careful, and possibly traveling with a child. Multiple calls came from the same small region. The FBI identified one specific phone booth repeatedly used by the anonymous caller. They staked it out. They waited. They watched. But he never returned. And then the calls stopped. The letters stopped. It was as if the man had evaporated from Wisconsin just as he had appeared in Montana. Nancy believed the letters were real. Investigators believed they were likely real. But with no new communication, the trail went cold again. By the early 1990s, the Marshalls were living in a state of emotional limbo. Their daily lives required cooking dinner, attending school functions, managing jobs, and raising their other children. But beneath the surface, the ache of loss never faded. Imagine waking every day wondering, is my daughter alive? Is she being hurt? Does she cry for me? Does she remember me? Does she know she has a family? This psychological torture can erode the strongest souls. Then in 1994, Kim's work transferred the family to Japan. A fresh start, a new country, a new environment. But Nyleen's memory followed them everywhere. In 1995, the Marshalls prepared to move to Mexico City for Kim's next assignment. Nancy flew ahead to secure housing. She never came home. Nancy Marshall was found dead in her Mexico City hotel room. The scene was disturbing. The door was kicked in. She had been badly beaten. She was found hanging. Her hands were tied behind her back. Her wedding ring was missing. Yet authorities initially ruled it a suicide. This was impossible. Nancy could not have tied her own hands. She could not have beaten herself. She could not have forced open her own door. Kim was devastated but determined. He tried to pursue a murder investigation, but the U.S. State Department warned him, if you push for a homicide ruling, they may not release her body for burial. Kim chose to bring her home. Nancy was buried in Texas. She died still searching for her daughter. Her sister Mickey said, I suspect murder. Kim believed the same. The grief that followed was immeasurable. Nancy had spent her final years living in a constant state of emotional torment, carrying hope, fear, frustration, and longing in equal measure. Her death marked one of the darkest moments in the entire saga. The woman who fought the hardest for Nyleen would never know what happened to her. After Nancy's death in Mexico City, the remaining Marshall family was forever altered. Grief had already carved deep lines into their lives, but losing Nancy so violently added a new layer of shock, disbelief, and unresolved pain. Kim found himself trying to protect his children from a double loss, first their sister, then their mother. He did his best, but trauma of this magnitude reshapes families. The siblings carried memories of a missing sister and a grieving mother who had gradually unraveled under the weight of unanswered questions. For children, memories of crisis freeze into place. Nyleen's older brother, just 6 when she disappeared, once said to Nancy, "My heart wants to cry. I really miss Nyleen. I really love her. Do you think we'll ever find her?" Her younger sister, not yet 2 years old when Nyleen vanished, had clung to her sister constantly. When she realized Nyleen wasn't coming home, her behavior changed. She stopped eating properly, refused to sleep alone, and would not touch her dolls anymore. The dolls reminded her too much of the sister she adored and could no longer find. The Marshall household became a place wrapped in silence, where one chair at the table was always empty, where one bed remained untouched, and where one absence echoed louder than any sound. Kim returned to the United States with his family. Though he tried to rebuild, Nyleen's case followed him everywhere. It loomed over every new chapter, every move, every attempt to carve out normalcy. But even as the family pushed forward with life's demands, school, work, daily routines, strangers across the country continued to remember the little girl with dimples who had vanished into the forest. And the next twist in the case would emerge in a place no one expected. In November of 1990, the popular television program Unsolved Mysteries aired a detailed segment about Nyleen's disappearance. The episode covered the picnic, the creek, the children's statements, the mysterious man in the purple jogging suit, the massive search, the disturbing anonymous letters, the phone calls from Wisconsin. It also featured a newly created age-progressed sketch showing what Nyleen might look like at age 12. This image struck viewers across the country. The episode generated hundreds of calls, as was typical for the show, but one particular tip would create a chain reaction that no one foresaw. Among the viewers of the episode was a man who believed that one of his daughter's classmates bore a strong resemblance to the age-progressed image of Nyleen. The girl's behavior, too, seemed unusual. She was withdrawn, guarded, and reluctant to talk about her past. Thinking he might finally have found the missing child, he contacted authorities. Investigators arrived at the school, quietly interviewed staff, and then spoke with the girl. What they discovered was startling. The girl was not Nyleen, but she was a missing child. Her name was Monica, and she had been abducted years earlier by her non-custodial father. She had been missing for 8 years. Because of the tip triggered by the Unsolved Mysteries broadcast about Nyleen, the authorities were able to locate Monica and return her to her mother. The Marshall family heard about the outcome. Although it was not the lead they desperately needed, Nancy, before her passing, once said it gave her hope. If our story can save another child, then maybe one day someone will help bring my daughter home. Even after her death, that sentiment remained carved into the heart of the case. Though the lead did not bring Nyleen back, it proved something essential. People were still looking. People still cared. In August of 1991, another potential breakthrough emerged. A 42-year-old man named Richard James Wilson, already on probation for the sexual assault of a minor, walked into the Livingston, Montana police station and claimed he had information about 2 crimes: the murder of a woman from Great Falls and the death of a little girl named Nyleen. At first glance, Wilson appeared credible. He possessed disturbing knowledge about crimes and projected a sense of remorse, sometimes a hallmark of offenders seeking relief through confession. He told investigators that he had killed the woman and disposed of her body in a specific area. He also claimed he had taken Nyleen's life in a remote part of the Elkhorn Mountains shortly after she disappeared. Authorities felt a mixture of dread and hope. If his story were true, it would at least bring answers, painful though they might be. Investigators took Wilson to the mountains. He pointed out an area near an old mining site, claiming he had left remains there. Officers combed the terrain, searched the shaft, and looked for anything: bones, clothing, personal items. They found nothing. Wilson's narrative faltered. His recollection of the area became inconsistent. He could not locate landmarks that should have been unmistakable. When investigators pressed him on details, his story shifted. Each retelling contradicted the last. Authorities soon suspected that Wilson suffered from severe mental illness, something documented in his psychiatric history. False confessions, especially in high-profile cases, are tragically common among individuals with unstable mental states. With no evidence linking him to Nyleen's disappearance and no remains found, the confession was dismissed. Wilson was released. The false hope that had momentarily flickered in investigators' hearts died out once again. By the mid to late 1990s, forensic science and investigative technology were evolving rapidly. DNA systems expanded. Databases grew more interconnected. Missing persons networks improved. But for Nyleen's case, there was still nothing tangible that investigators could submit for analysis. There were no fingerprints, no discarded clothing, no hair samples, no abandoned items, no confirmed sightings, no trace of her physical presence after that day in the mountains. Law enforcement returned to the search area multiple times throughout the decade, armed with new detection tools and cadaver dogs trained in advanced scent work. Still nothing. It was as if the mountains had swallowed her whole, or as if she had never stayed in them at all. But the public never forgot the letters from Wisconsin, nor did investigators. The mystery man who claimed to be raising Nyleen continued to haunt the case. In 1998, the same Unsolved Mysteries episode about Nyleen aired again in syndication. A nurse watching television in New Orleans felt a sudden jolt of recognition. She remembered a young woman, about 14 or 15, who had come into the hospital 2 years earlier with a man who appeared to be in his 40s. The girl was pregnant and preparing to give birth. Both she and the man had behaved strangely. They avoided giving their names. They bristled when questioned. They acted frightened of medical forms. They gave vague, inconsistent answers. The nurse remembered that the girl had called herself Helena, a name suspiciously close to Helena, Montana, where Nyleen was from. The nurse reported the memory to the authorities. The FBI tracked down the young woman, who was now living elsewhere. She said she remembered little of her early childhood, but she believed her mother's name might have been Nile, another suspicious similarity. Agents obtained a DNA sample. They sent it for comparison with a sample provided by Nyleen's biological father. When the results returned, they delivered a familiar heartbreak. It wasn't her. The young woman was another victim of childhood instability, but not Nyleen. Investigators marked the lead as false, but not meaningless. Each false lead reminded them that they weren't just searching for one missing child. They were shining light into corners where many other children had been abandoned, taken, lost, or forgotten. And still, the question lingered. Why did so many potential leads evoke memories of Nyleen? What was it about her disappearance that echoed across the lives of so many? As the late 1990s gave way to the early 2000s, a new phenomenon emerged: internet sleuthing. Amateur investigators, true crime enthusiasts, and ordinary citizens gained access to forums where cold cases were discussed in detail. Nyleen's case quickly became a focal point. On message boards, theories multiplied. Some of the most widely debated included Theory 1. The man in the purple jogging suit was real, and he abducted her. Supporters of this theory cite the independent statements from children, the sudden loss of scent trail, the speed of disappearance, the letters in Wisconsin. Theory 2, she fell into a mine shaft that searchers never located. There are hundreds of shafts in the Elkhorn Mountains. Many are undocumented. Some are completely hidden by vegetation. Supporters argue she may have fallen into one too deep for rescuers to detect. Theory 3, she may have been taken and sold by an organized group. Some believe the man could have been connected to trafficking networks active in the 1980s. Theory 4, she wandered off, succumbed to the elements, and wildlife dispersed any remains. Searchers reject this theory, saying a child that young would not have traveled far without leaving a trace. Theory 5, the letter writer was the true abductor, or he was a hoaxer who had access to inside information. Investigators have never been able to settle on one answer. Even decades later, Nyleen's disappearance remains one of the most debated child missing cases online. In interviews conducted years later, several of the original rescuers spoke candidly about the case. One of the most memorable statements came from a volunteer who assisted on horseback. "Whenever I'm out hunting or chasing cattle in that part of the country, my eyes still look for yellow." Yellow, the color of Nyleen's shirt the day she disappeared. He said that even decades later, every time he rode past a patch of wildflowers, a scrap of fabric caught in branches, or a piece of weathered debris along the mountainside, he felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He wasn't looking for evidence. He was looking for closure, but the mountains never gave it. Unlike many cold cases that eventually fade into filing cabinets, Nyleen's case remained active because of national and state clearinghouse systems. Jennifer Vitz of the Montana Department of Justice once explained, "As soon as an agency enters a missing person record into the FBI file, that information gets posted to the clearinghouse website. This matters because other states can cross-reference leads. Tips can trigger alerts nationwide. Suspicious sightings can be compared across years. For Nyleen, this system meant that even when the case seemed quiet, it was never forgotten. Monthly, the sheriff's office still receives inquiries, 2 or 3 calls each month, even 30 and 40 years later. Sometimes it's a hiker who found a shoe. Sometimes a camper who saw a strange structure. Sometimes a genealogist who noticed an anomaly. Sometimes a prisoner with a story. Sometimes a neighbor who overheard something decades earlier. Most tips lead nowhere, but they keep the case alive. In 2018, the Find Nyleen Marshall Facebook page revealed a new development. Businesses in Janesville, Indiana, and Edgerton, Wisconsin had received handwritten letters referencing Nyleen. The letters were postmarked from Cincinnati, Ohio. They had no return address. Their contents were not publicly disclosed, but law enforcement confirmed they were being scrutinized. Were they connected to the original Wisconsin letters? Were they the same writer? Were they a copycat? Or were they another cruel prank? Investigators have never revealed the answer. If they know, they have kept it quiet. Time behaves strangely in cold cases. In the beginning, minutes matter, then hours matter. Then days become crucial, and weeks pass painfully. But once a case crosses into months, then years, time begins to stretch and warp. Memories fade. Witnesses move away. Some grow old. Some pass away. Geography changes. Forests shift. Trees fall. Floods reshape creek beds. Detectives retire. Officers get promoted or transferred. New investigators arrive decades later, inheriting a case file filled with photocopies yellowed from age. But even as time moves forward, for the Marshall family, the timeline of grief barely changed. For them, June 25, 1983 feels immediate, like a wound that never closed. For investigators, time brings both clarity and distance. Older assumptions get challenged. New forensic methods emerge. Patterns from similar cases become visible. For the public, time can make a mystery more intriguing, almost mythic. And for Nyleen herself, time is something she never got to share with her family, whether her fate lies in the mountains or beyond them. As the decades passed, Nyleen's case transformed, from an urgent missing child search into one of Montana's most widely discussed unsolved mysteries. And much of that discussion centered around theories, each one shaped by the clues, the letters, the terrain, and the single moment she disappeared. The abduction theory is the most widely accepted among both investigators and the public. It rests on several strong pillars. 1. The accounts of multiple children. The children at the creek independently reported seeing a strange man, seeing him approach Nyleen, seeing him speak to her, hearing her respond, seeing him step closer to her, and witnessing the two disappear almost simultaneously. Children do not fabricate detailed group hallucinations. The accounts were consistent, separate, and clear. 2. The sudden end of the scent trail. Search dog Juke followed her scent, briefly. Then the scent stopped abruptly. A scent generally ends when a child is carried, the child enters a vehicle, or the trail leads across an environment that cannot hold scent, such as certain rock formations. The area where the scent faded was close to the creek and near trees, places where a predator could hide. 3. Her aversion to walking barefoot. Nyleen disliked walking on rough ground. She would not have wandered deep into the forest without shoes. Several searchers said this alone convinced them she had been carried away. 4. No physical trace found. In missing child wilderness cases, searchers typically find clothing, fabric scraps, footprints, disturbed plants, objects dropped, signs of animal activity. But in this case, nothing. After repeated searches across the largest search operation in local history, not one shred of evidence was found. It was as if she vanished into thin air. 5. The letters and calls from Wisconsin. While it is possible the letters were from a disturbed hoaxer, the detailed information, much of it accurate, suggested the writer either had direct access to the child, had access to inside case information, or had access to someone who knew Nyleen personally. Investigators lean toward the first possibility. The combination of these elements makes abduction the theory most investigators privately consider the strongest, but not the only one. Though less widely embraced by those closest to the case, some search experts believe the following scenario is possible. Nyleen may have wandered just far enough to move out of earshot and visibility and suffered an accident deep in the rugged terrain. Supporters argue a child can move faster than adults expect. A small body can become concealed by brush or terrain. Wildlife may disturb remains. Old mine shafts can swallow someone so deeply that no amount of searching can find them. Montana has thousands of abandoned shafts. Many remain unmapped. Some are so overgrown they vanish into the forest floor. Even experienced searchers avoid them. If she fell into one, even search dogs could miss it. However, many searchers reject this theory. The primary reason: the search was too thorough. Grid searches covered enormous ground. Helicopters scanned miles with heat sensors. Mine shafts nearest to the creek were searched repeatedly. To accept this theory is to believe that hundreds of volunteers and dozens of professionals missed every trace of a child in an area they searched more thoroughly than nearly any other missing child case in the region. Most feel that is unlikely. The theory of animals or natural forces. Montana is home to black bears, mountain lions, wolves, coyotes, moose, and other large animals. It is natural for some to consider whether wildlife may have been involved. However, experts argue there would have been signs. Disturbed soil, clothing fragments, tracks, blood, drag marks, something. Predatory animal attacks on humans almost always leave evidence. Nothing like that was ever found. Additionally, the creek area where Nyleen last stood was populated with dozens of other children and adults. Wild animals generally avoid groups of people. This theory is considered the weakest. Some believe the man in the purple jogging suit may not have been a random predator. He may have been someone who attended the picnic but was not recognized later, someone who lived in the area and watched from afar, someone who knew the Marshalls, someone who had a past connection to Nancy, someone who blended into the crowd before and after the event. Parents at the picnic were focused on their children, conversations, and the day's activities. A stranger could easily stand among them unnoticed. Investigators examined all attendees. No suspicious person was identified. But they acknowledged that someone could have slipped in and out without being logged. This theory sits between abduction and opportunity. Not a random drifter, but not necessarily someone close to the family either. Maybe someone who simply walked among them and chose the moment carefully. Investigators in multiple states compared Nyleen's case to other child disappearances in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. Some offenders in that era traveled widely, targeting campgrounds, national forests, school routes, rural communities. A few potential suspects emerged, men known for crossing multiple states committing abductions. But none could be definitively placed near Helena in June of 1983. Still, some investigators believe if a serial predator abducted Nyleen, he may have left Montana immediately and continued traveling. This would align with the letters describing trips across the country and abroad. Among the most haunting possibilities is that the man who sent the letters truly did take Nyleen. The psychological profile suggested he viewed himself as a caretaker. He believed he was saving her. He rationalized abuse as affection. He had time, mobility, and money. He was highly intelligent, organized, and deliberate. He was capable of controlling her life for years without detection. He described her: growth, travel, development, new habits, tooth loss, physical changes, emotional reactions. Much of this was accurate. Investigators never publicly confirmed which details were real, but the typewriting, the postal routes, and the behavioral patterns strongly suggested the writer was methodical and deliberate. A hoaxer generally writes to seek attention. This man avoided attention. A hoaxer usually exaggerates outrageous, overtly sensational details. This man wrote mundane, believable domestic descriptions. A hoaxer often signs the letter or taunts investigators. This man did neither. His letters resembled the behavior of a man with long-term access to a child, not a bored prankster, but he disappeared. No more letters, no more calls, just silence. Some investigators believe he may have died, and if he did, the truth may be buried with him. One of the most heartbreaking theories is also one many investigators fear might be true. Nyleen may have grown up believing the man who took her was her father. Children adapt quickly. A 4-year-old is young enough to forget certain details, especially after repeated manipulation. If she was renamed Kay, as the letter writer claimed, and raised in a different environment, she may have believed. She was adopted. She had no other family. Her memories were dreams. Her past was normal. Her mother was dead, or that her origin story was something entirely different. This theory is one reason the case has remained active for decades. If she is alive, she may not even know to look for her real identity. If the abductor took her overseas, married someone, or changed her name, she may be living somewhere today as a woman who always felt something didn't add up, but could never place why. It's a devastating and haunting thought, but also, in its own way, a hopeful one, because it means she might be alive. Criminal psychologists who reviewed the anonymous letters and call transcripts noted several concerning personality traits. 1. He needed to feel loved and needed. He framed the abduction as rescuing a frightened child. He described her hugging him spontaneously. He took care to portray a nurturing environment. This is a common delusion in abductor psychology. 2. He was intelligent and articulate. His grammar, punctuation, and sentence structure were precise. He understood how to manipulate tone to appear gentle. 3. He exhibited traits of delusional attachment. He saw himself as a guardian, not an abuser. This is a hallmark of certain personality disorders. 4. He likely had financial means. He referenced investment income. He claimed to travel frequently and freely. He claimed to work from home, a rarity in the mid-80s. 5. He demonstrated secrecy and isolation. He avoided detection. He communicated sporadically. He used multiple payphones. Psychologists believe he may have been a highly controlled, high-functioning offender, someone able to blend seamlessly into society, someone with no criminal record, someone with intelligence and planning skills, someone capable of raising a child for years without raising suspicion. To this day, no one knows his identity. If he had a family, partner, or friends, none ever came forward. If they suspected anything, they buried their concerns. And if he took secrets to the grave, the truth may be lost forever. Decades after the disappearance, investigators continue to visit the Elkhorn Mountains. They return with cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, drones, forensic experts, and occasionally, heavy equipment to dig into suspected areas. They have never found a trace. The mountains remain unchanged, quiet, towering, indifferent. The creek still runs over the same stones. The trees still whisper under the Montana wind. The abandoned cabin still leans under its own age. Nature remembers nothing. It hides everything. Investigators say if she is there, the mountains have taken her in a way that is almost impossible to undo. But many believe she is not there at all. Many believe she left the mountains that very afternoon. Many believe a stranger took her far from Montana and that she may have lived an entirely different life because of it. By the early 2000s, nearly 20 years had passed since Nyleen's disappearance, yet the case was far from forgotten. If anything, its reach had grown wider. The development of digital databases meant that every missing child case entered into the system could now be cross-checked instantly against unidentified remains, runaway reports, immigration stops, border records, foster system anomalies, and hospital records nationwide. The ability to share information across states in seconds made the Nyleen Marshall case more searchable than ever. Age progression imaging also improved drastically. With sharper digital modeling, forensic artists created new representations of what Nyleen might look like at age 25, age 33, age 43. These images circulated online, appearing in missing person directories, true crime forums, and advocacy sites. For some families, constant digital reminders harden grief. For others, they bring renewed hope. For the Marshall family, breaksheet, the images felt like brief windows into the life that might have been. Over time, Nyleen's disappearance became a case often referenced in discussions about child safety in national parks, rapid response protocols, missing child hotlines, interagency cooperation, tracking technology for children, the fragility of parental supervision in unpredictable environments. Advocacy groups cited her name during campaigns for improved missing child reporting requirements, mandatory immediate response, removing waiting periods, increased federal assistance for rural searches, improved tracking of abandoned mines on public lands. Nyleen's case wasn't only a tragedy, it became a motivator for reform. Her disappearance reminded the nation that a single moment is all it takes for a child to be lost forever, and that communities must work together to prevent such loss. Most cold cases fade from public memory within a few years, but the disappearance of Nyleen Kay Marshall has never faded. Even 40 years later, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office still receives 2 to 3 calls a month, regular emails, letters, online submissions, and occasional in-person visits from amateur investigators. Some callers believe they saw her decades ago. Some believe they met someone who resembled her. Some believe they themselves might be her. Most tips lead nowhere, but every call, every letter, every moment of attention ensures one thing. Nyleen's name has never been forgotten. Several detectives have carried the torch for this case, long after many of the original searchers retired. Some have said, when you work a case like this, it never leaves you. They revisit old reports, rethink old assumptions, and continuously compare Nyleen's profile to unidentified Jane Does, medical records flagged for inconsistencies, adoption anomalies, immigration data, DNA hits in modern databases. As new forensic technologies emerge, detectives revisit samples that were once considered useless. Even if the case grows older, investigators grow more determined. One officer said, "As long as her name is in our system, we will keep looking." This means the search for Nyleen is not an artifact of the past. It is an active investigation, one that could still lead to answers. In the 2010s and 2020s, forensic DNA science advanced in leaps and bounds. Cases once considered unsolvable were suddenly cracked wide open through genealogical DNA, familial DNA searches, forensic genealogy databases, distant relative triangulation, voluntarily uploaded ancestry profiles. These breakthroughs solved cases that had been cold for 40, 50, even 60 years. Investigators hope that if Nyleen is alive, or if her remains are ever found, DNA will finally provide clarity. Her biological father has provided DNA samples. Her extended family has profiles in national databases. This means if Nyleen ever submits DNA through an ancestry site, or if a distant relative unknowingly does so, a match could appear, and her identity could be discovered instantly. Detectives believe this is the most promising path to answers. Despite repeated searches using modern technology, the Elkhorn Mountains still guard their mysteries. Drones have scanned the forest canopy. Ground-penetrating radar has been deployed in areas where soil disruption was suspected. Cadaver dogs trained in new detection methods have revisited the terrain, but the mountains remain stubborn. The landscape is vast, rugged, and constantly evolving. Snowmelt reshapes the soil. Vegetation grows thick over time. Mining hazards collapse or shift. The forest is beautiful, but it is also unforgiving. Investigators acknowledge, if she is there, we may never find her. Yet they keep returning, because they know her family deserves the truth. It is a strange thought, but one that continues to surface. What if the anonymous letter writer was telling the truth? What if he really did raise her? What if she lived far from Montana, in the Midwest, in the South, in Canada, or even abroad? If she grew up believing the man was her father, she could have attended school, gotten married, traveled, worked, had her own children, lived an ordinary life under a false name, and she may never have known she was the missing girl the nation searched for. This theory haunts investigators and family members alike, because if she is alive, she may not know who she truly is. She may not know she has siblings. She may not know her mother died searching for her. She may not know she has a family waiting for her. There is a certain heartbreak in imagining this, but also a sliver of hope, because a life lived, even in shadows, is still a life. Nancy's death in 1995 is a chapter many struggle to speak about. Her life ended violently, far from home, in a moment when she was preparing for a new start. But the truth remains. Nancy spent the last 12 years of her life fighting for her daughter, fighting with her voice, with her heart, with her grief, and with her unwavering hope. Her advocacy did not die with her. Her courage inspired other families of missing children. Her persistence helped strengthen search protocols. Her love kept Nyleen's story alive across decades. And in every mention of Nyleen's name, Nancy's legacy endures. 40 years have passed. 4 decades of searching, hoping, questioning, and grieving. And still, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office keeps Nyleen's case open. Investigators revisit new tips and old theories. They remain in contact with national missing child organizations. They review DNA submissions and run comparisons. They remain alert to any new clues, even the faintest whisper. The sheriff once said, "We have gone back to the area many times. We have found no evidence. But until we do, we will keep looking." This is what it means for a case to remain open. It means that hope, however small, has not died. Not yet, not ever. The disappearance of Nyleen Kay Marshall leaves us with questions that stretch into eternity. Did she walk into the forest alone? Did she fall into a mine shaft hidden from view? Did a stranger take her? Was she raised by someone who convinced her she belonged to him? Did she live a life far from Montana? Did she ever wonder about the family she left behind? Did she remember the creek, the picnic, the laughter? Did she remember being loved? There are no answers, only possibilities, only hope, only grief, only time. And time continues to move, but the questions remain. Imagine for a moment the world through the eyes of a 4-year-old child standing by a creek on a summer afternoon. The sound of water, the warmth of sunlight, the laughter of other children, the presence of family nearby. And then, something changes. A voice, a conversation, a hand extended, a step into the unknown. Whether she was taken by a stranger, lost to the mountains, or carried far from home. Her story didn't end that day. Her story continues in every person who searches for her, in every parent who holds their child a little tighter, in every investigator who refuses to close the file, in every viewer who listens, remembers, and carries her name forward. The tragedy of Nyleen's disappearance is not simply the loss of a child, it is the echo of a mystery that has touched generations. And that echo continues. If you have any information about the disappearance or possible whereabouts of Nyleen Kay Marshall, please contact the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office or Child Find of America. Even the smallest detail could bring truth to a family that has waited far too long. Before we close, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, and hit the subscribe button. It helps us continue investigating long-forgotten mysteries and bringing attention to cases that still need answers. You are watching Cold Case Desk, where every detail matters, every voice counts, and every missing person deserves to be remembered. Thank you for spending this time with us. And wherever Nyleen may be, we hope she knows she was loved.